Arrival shock in America. Have you ever stood in a completely new place, your heart beating a little faster than usual, your mind suddenly blank, and asked yourself, why am I here? That was me on a cold morning in the United States, when I realized that my English disappeared faster than my breath in the winter air. This video is not just about learning a language. It is about emotions, marriage, culture shock, and that quiet moment when you feel like giving up, but somehow you don't. If you have ever studied English and felt small, lost, or exhausted, then maybe this story is for you. On my first day in America, I thought the biggest shock would be the language. I was wrong. The first shock was the weather. Not the kind of cold where you put on another jacket and feel fine. This was the kind of cold that goes straight into your bones and makes you question every life decision you have ever made. I stood in a parking lot, strong wind blowing, light snow falling, and I heard an American say something very fast. I caught only 2 words, "You're good." I nodded and smiled, even though I had no idea what I was good at. When your brain enters a new environment, it does something very strange. It switches into survival mode. According to psychology, when your body senses danger, even social danger, like not understanding the language, the amygdala activates a stress response. As a result, the part of your brain responsible for language works less efficiently. In simple words, the more nervous you are, the worse you speak. Basically, your brain pulls the handbrake at the exact moment you need to move forward. I arrived in the US just 5 weeks ago with a naive belief. I've studied English for years. I'll be fine. But classroom English and real-life English live in 2 different universes. In class, people speak slowly, clearly, politely. In real life, Americans speak as if time is chasing them. They swallow sounds, cut sentences in half, and add expressions that textbooks never teach. I heard, "How's it going?" and needed 3 seconds to remember that no one was actually asking about my journey. The second shock was the rhythm of life. In America, everything moves fast, but emotions are expected to be clear. People speak directly, honestly, and they expect you to do the same. The problem is, when you don't have enough words, you start using silence instead of emotion. I did that. During my first family dinners, I smiled more than I spoke. I nodded more than I responded. Inside, I was tired. Outside, I tried to look okay. "I'm fine," I said, even when I was not fine at all. The climate in the US also played a quiet, but powerful role in this emotional shock. Sunny mornings, cold afternoons, windy nights. My body wasn't ready. My mood followed the weather. Science calls this temporary circadian rhythm disruption. When your sleep is affected, your focus and language memory drop as well. You are not becoming less intelligent. Your brain is simply trying to adapt to too many changes at once. One evening, I stood in the kitchen, staring at a foggy window, and wondered if coming to America had been a mistake. I missed home. I missed speaking freely in my native language. I missed not having to translate every thought before opening my mouth. In that moment, I realized a painful truth. Learning English is not just about learning words. It is about accepting that you will feel clumsy for a while. Here is something interesting. When you allow yourself to slow down, your brain relaxes too. Research in language learning shows that slow listening and slow speaking reduce cognitive load, allowing the brain to process sound and meaning more effectively. I started talking to myself using very simple sentences. It's cold today. I feel tired. I miss home. Nothing fancy. Nothing complex. But real. In those early days in America, I did not try to become good at English right away. I only tried to survive small conversations. Buying coffee. Asking for directions. Greeting neighbors. Every time I completed a full sentence, even a short one, I felt a small sense of control return. It felt like learning to walk again after slipping. Slow, but stable. There is something emotional about speaking a new language during life changes like marriage, relocation, or family adjustment. Your words feel smaller than your emotions. You want to explain yourself deeply, but you only have basic sentences. That gap can be painful, but it can also be powerful. It forces you to focus on what truly matters. Meaning over perfection. Connection over grammar. If you are practicing listening, reading, and speaking English and feel stuck, remember this. The initial shock is not a sign of failure. It is proof that you have stepped outside your comfort zone. And that zone, as safe as it feels, has never been the place where a new language is born. Basically, your brain is not betraying you. It is learning how to live in a new world. Climate changes, mood changes. Have you ever noticed how your emotions change before you even understand why? One moment you feel calm, the next you feel irritated, tired, or strangely quiet, and nothing happened. That was my daily experience during the second week in America. I thought I was struggling with English. In reality, I was struggling with the weather. And my brain was quietly reacting before my words ever had a chance. If you have ever tried to speak English and felt your mood collapse for no clear reason, this part of the story might sound uncomfortably familiar. In my home country, the climate had a rhythm I trusted. Seasons changed slowly. My body knew what to expect. In the US, especially where I stayed, the weather felt unpredictable. Cold mornings, bright afternoons, sharp wind at night. Some days felt like 4 seasons arguing inside 24 hours. At first, I laughed it off. Then I noticed something strange. On colder, darker days, my English felt heavier. My listening slowed down. My speaking felt fragile, like one wrong word could break everything. Science has a quiet explanation for this. Climate affects mood through hormones, sleep, and energy regulation. When sunlight decreases or temperatures drop suddenly, the brain may reduce serotonin production, the chemical linked to mood. Stability. Lower serotonin means higher emotional sensitivity. So when you feel more anxious, more tired, or more easily frustrated in a new climate, it's not weakness. It's chemistry. And chemistry doesn't care how motivated you are. I remember one afternoon when the sky turned gray much earlier than expected. I was supposed to practice speaking English with my partner. Simple conversation. Nothing serious. But my body felt slow. My thoughts felt foggy. When I tried to speak, my sentences came out broken. I paused too long. I forgot basic words. My partner asked kindly, "Are you okay?" And I answered, "Yes." But my tone said no. Climate doesn't just change temperature. It changes tone. The emotional problem with climate shock is that it feels personal. You blame yourself. You think, why am I so sensitive? Why am I so quiet today? But your nervous system is doing extra work behind the scenes. It is regulating body temperature, adjusting circadian rhythm, processing unfamiliar sensory input, all while you're trying to translate thoughts into a second language. That's like asking your brain to run a marathon while solving math problems. Something has to slow down. Usually, it's language. During this time, I noticed an important pattern. On days when I slept poorly because of cold air or strong wind noise, my English comprehension dropped noticeably. Research supports this. Sleep deprivation directly affects working memory, which is essential for listening and speaking. Without enough quality sleep, your brain struggles to hold words long enough to form sentences. So if you feel like your English disappears on certain days, check your sleep before judging your skill. Another layer of difficulty came from emotional expectations. In American culture, productivity doesn't stop for weather. Cold day. You still show up. Bad mood. You still communicate clearly. That cultural pressure added weight. I felt like I had to perform emotionally stable English, even when my body wasn't ready. And when I failed, frustration grew. Not outwardly. Quietly. The dangerous kind. This is where many English learners give up. Not because they can't learn, but because they misread the signals. They think, I'm getting worse. In reality, they're adapting. Adaptation is messy. It looks like inconsistency. Some days you feel fluent. Some days you can barely speak. That fluctuation doesn't mean regression. It means your brain is recalibrating under new environmental conditions. I started doing something simple but powerful. I adjusted my English practice to my climate reality. On cold, low-energy days, I stopped forcing fast speech. I focused on slow listening, gentle repetition, short speaking sessions. Science calls this matching cognitive load to physiological state. I called it being kind to myself. Instead of long conversations, I practiced sentences connected to my feelings. I feel cold. Today is heavy. My energy is low. Language became a mirror, not a performance. Interestingly, naming emotions, even in simple English, helped regulate them. Studies in emotional labeling show that putting feelings into words reduces activity in the amygdala and increases control in the prefrontal cortex. In normal language, when you say what you feel, your brain calms down. Even if your grammar isn't perfect. Even if your vocabulary is basic. As days passed, I noticed small improvements. Not in speed. In stability. My English didn't suddenly become better. But it became more consistent. Climate stopped feeling like an enemy and started feeling like information. Cold day. I slowed down. Bright day. I spoke more. Windy night. I rested more. Instead of fighting my environment, I worked with it. There was also an emotional shift. I stopped comparing myself to an imaginary, perfect immigrant who adapts instantly. I accepted that mood. Changes are part of relocation. That language learning is not linear. That feeling low doesn't mean failing. It means processing. If you are learning English and notice your motivation dropping during certain seasons or weather patterns, listen carefully. Your brain is talking to you through emotion. Adjust your pace. Adjust your expectations. Language grows best in a nervous system that feels safe, not pressured. Climate change doesn't just shape landscapes. It shapes conversations. It shapes patience. It shapes how gently you need to treat yourself while learning something hard in a new place. And once you understand that, English stops feeling like a test and starts feeling like a tool you can slowly, realistically use. Basically, your mood is not blocking your English. It's guiding it. Daily English isn't classroom English. Have you ever learned something for years, felt confident about it, and then discovered it barely works in real life? That was my relationship with English during my third week in America. I didn't suddenly forget grammar. I didn't lose vocabulary overnight. What I lost was the illusion that classroom English prepares you for daily life. Real English showed up unannounced, without subtitles, without pauses, and definitely without asking if I was ready. In school, English is polite. It waits its turn. Sentences are complete. Questions sound like questions. Answers sound like answers. In daily American life, English is messy. It interrupts itself. It changes direction mid-sentence. It hides meaning inside tone, timing, and shared context. And if you miss that context, you miss the message. I realized this the hard way one morning when someone said, "We should do this sometime," smiled, and walked away. I stood there wondering, was that a plan? A goodbye? A polite lie? Daily English in America is not built to teach you. It is built to move fast. People assume shared cultural understanding. They assume you know the rules. When you don't, confusion feels personal. I started noticing how often I smiled just to cover the gap. Smiling became my emergency response. Not because I was happy, but because I needed time to process. Inside my head, translation was happening at 3 levels: words, intention, and emotion. That's exhausting. The biggest shock was how much meaning lives outside words. In class, meaning is inside sentences. In real life, meaning lives between sentences. A short "okay" can mean agreement, hesitation, or passive resistance. A casual "sure" can mean yes or no. Your textbook doesn't warn you about that. It just hands you vocabulary and hopes for the best. Neuroscience explains why this feels overwhelming. When listening to a second language in real-time conversation, your brain processes sound, predicts meaning, reads facial cues, and prepares a response simultaneously. That's a heavy cognitive load. In classrooms, that load is reduced. Teachers slow down. Context is controlled. In real life, there is no such mercy. Your brain either adapts or panics. Mine did both. I remember my first phone call in English. No visual cues. No body language. Just sound. The person spoke quickly, casually, confidently. I understood maybe 60%. But that missing 40% felt like a cliff. When the call ended, my hands were sweating. Not because the conversation was difficult, but because it exposed a truth. I could study English, but I hadn't yet lived in it. This gap affected my confidence deeply. Especially in family and relationship conversations. When emotions entered the room, my English left. In class, emotions are irrelevant. In life, they are central. I could explain past tense rules easily. I struggled to explain how I felt after a long day. That imbalance hurt. It made me feel immature, even though I wasn't. Psychology calls this identity threat. When language limits your self-expression, you feel smaller than you are. You know who you are inside, but you can't fully show it. That creates frustration, shame, and sometimes anger. Many language learners quit here, not because English is hard, but because feeling reduced is painful. What changed everything was a small mindset shift. I stopped asking, "Is my English correct?" and started asking, "Is my English doing its job?" Daily English doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be functional, clear enough, honest enough, human enough. I gave myself permission to speak incomplete sentences, to pause, to correct myself out loud. Something surprising happened. People waited. People listened. Real life was kinder than my imagination. I also began studying daily English differently. Not from textbooks, but from observation. I listened to how people ordered food, disagreed politely, changed topics, ended conversations. I noticed patterns. Short phrases. Softeners like kind of. A bit, and I think. These weren't advanced words, but they carried emotional weight. They made communication smoother. Science supports this approach. Usage-based language learning theory suggests that language is acquired through repeated exposure to meaningful chunks, not isolated grammar rules. Daily English is built from chunks. That makes sense. I'm not sure. Let me think. Once I started collecting these chunks, speaking felt less like construction and more like recall. Emotionally, this was freeing. I didn't need to invent sentences under pressure. I could borrow them, adapt them, use them imperfectly. Language became lighter, more playful, less threatening. Instead of avoiding conversations, I leaned into short ones. Each interaction became data, not judgment. One important realization: daily English values clarity over complexity. Simple words said at the right moment matter more than perfect grammar said too late. I practiced slowing down, lowering my voice, and letting silence exist. Silence, I learned, is not failure. It is space. If you are learning English and feel disappointed that real conversations don't match your years of study, you are not alone. Classroom English teaches structure. Life English teaches survival. Both matter. But only one prepares you for emotions, relationships, and misunderstandings. And that one can only be learned by living inside it. Daily English will humble you. It will confuse you. It will force you to listen more than speak. But it will also teach you something powerful. Communication is not about sounding smart. It's about being understood, especially when emotions are involved. Basically, classroom English builds knowledge. Daily English builds resilience. And resilience is what keeps you speaking when everything feels unfamiliar. Love needs language. Have you ever felt deeply connected to someone, yet completely unable to explain what was happening inside you? Not because the feeling was unclear, but because the words weren't there. That was a quiet tension growing inside my relationship during my 4th week in America. Love didn't disappear when I changed countries. But the language that carried that love struggled to keep up. And when emotions rise faster than vocabulary, misunderstandings don't knock. They walk straight in. Before coming to the US, I believed love was universal. Feelings are feelings, right? You don't need perfect words to care about someone. That belief is comforting, and only partially true. In real life, especially in a different culture, love needs language the way fire needs oxygen. Without it, nothing dramatic happens at first. It just slowly weakens. In America, emotional expression is expected to be clear. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just clear. People say what they feel when they feel it. They don't wait for the right moment, as much as I was used to. At first, I admired that. Then it terrified me. Because clarity requires words. And when you don't have enough of them, silence becomes your default response. There were moments when my partner asked simple questions. How do you feel about this? Did that bother you? What do you need right now? In my head, the answers were complex. I felt overwhelmed, insecure, tired, grateful, confused, all at once. In English, all I could say was, I don't know. That sentence became a wall. Not because it was false, but because it was incomplete. Over time, I don't know started to sound like I don't care. And that is where love quietly starts to hurt. Psychology explains this gap well. Emotions are processed faster than language, especially in a second language. When emotional arousal increases, the brain prioritizes regulation over expression. This is why, during emotional conversations, your vocabulary shrinks. You're not losing intelligence. Your brain is trying to protect emotional balance. Unfortunately, protection often looks like withdrawal. I remember one evening when a small disagreement surfaced. Nothing dramatic. Just a difference in expectations. In my native language, I would have explained myself gently, adding context, emotion, reassurance. In English, my sentences came out sharp and short. That's not what I meant. You don't understand. It's fine. But it wasn't fine. And the more I said less, the more the emotional distance grew. Love was there. Intention was there. But language failed to deliver it. Cultural differences made this harder. In my culture, emotional restraint often signals respect. In American culture, restraint can signal avoidance. So while I thought I was being careful, my partner felt shut out. No one was wrong. But the gap between intention and interpretation widened. This is where many bilingual relationships struggle. Not because of lack of love, but because emotional timing and language speed don't match. Love moves fast. Language learning moves slowly. That mismatch creates frustration on both sides. The turning point came when I stopped trying to explain everything and started naming one feeling at a time. Research in emotional communication shows that specificity reduces conflict. Instead of explaining stories, I practiced saying single emotions. I feel nervous. I feel pressured. I feel scared of saying the wrong thing. These sentences were simple, almost childlike, but they were honest. And honesty travels faster than fluency. Something unexpected happened. The more simply I spoke, the safer the conversation felt. There was less guessing, less tension, less emotional noise. I learned that love doesn't need advanced vocabulary. It needs accuracy. One true sentence is better than 10 perfect ones that miss the point. I also learned to slow conversations down intentionally. I asked for time. Can I think first? Can we talk slowly? In the past, I would have felt embarrassed asking this. Now I understood it as emotional self-regulation. Science supports this too. Slowing speech lowers physiological arousal, making emotional processing easier for both people involved. Gradually, English stopped being an obstacle and became a tool. Not a perfect one, but a usable one. Love conversations became shorter, calmer, clearer. We focused less on winning understanding and more on building it. One important realization stayed with me. Love does not test your grammar. It tests your willingness to stay present when communication feels uncomfortable. Language is just the bridge. You don't need a beautiful bridge. You need a strong one. If you are learning English while navigating a relationship, be gentle with yourself. Emotional fluency comes after emotional safety. Speak simply. Pause often. Clarify feelings instead of defending positions. And remember, misunderstandings don't mean failure. They mean you're learning to love in a new language. Basically, love doesn't ask you to be fluent. It asks you to be real. And real, even in broken English, is still powerful. The first emotional argument. Have you ever felt an argument coming before a single word was spoken? That quiet pressure in your chest, the tightening jaw, the sense that something small is about to turn big, not because it matters that much, but because emotions are already tired. My first real argument in English didn't start with shouting. It started with misunderstanding. Silence, and a sentence that came out wrong at the worst possible moment. It happened during my 5th week in America. By then, I thought I was adjusting. I could handle daily conversations. I could explain basic needs. I could even joke a little. That confidence made the moment more dangerous, because I didn't see it coming. The argument wasn't planned. It grew out of something ordinary, a schedule change, a missed expectation, a comment that sounded harmless in one culture and sharp in another. When emotions rise, language becomes fragile. I felt it instantly. My heart rate increased. My thoughts sped up. But my English slowed down. Words that usually sat ready in my mind suddenly hid. My sentences shortened. My tone hardened. I said, "You didn't tell me." What I meant was, I felt unprepared and excluded. But English didn't give me that option in the moment. This is where neuroscience quietly steps in. During emotional arousal, the brain prioritizes threat detection and emotional regulation over complex language production. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for reasoning and language control, loses influence. The emotional brain takes over. In simple terms, when you're upset, your English shrinks. Not because you don't know better, but because your brain is busy protecting you. The argument escalated not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. I paused too long. My partner filled the silence with interpretation. I interrupted too quickly. My tone sounded defensive. Each small misstep added weight. English, which had been manageable in calm moments, became unreliable under pressure. I remember thinking, why can't I explain this properly? That thought alone made things worse. Self-judgment added another emotional layer. Suddenly, I wasn't just arguing. I was also fighting my own sense of inadequacy. That's a heavy load for any conversation, especially in a second language. At one point, I said, forget it. In my mind, that meant, I'm overwhelmed and need space. In English, it sounded like dismissal. The reaction was immediate. Confusion. Hurt. Silence. And in that silence, I felt something break, not permanently, but noticeably. The argument ended, but the tension stayed. Later that night, alone with my thoughts, I replayed everything. Every sentence. Every pause. Every word choice. I realized something uncomfortable. This wasn't just a language problem. It was an emotional timing problem. I tried to speak at the speed of my feelings, not at the speed of my English. And English couldn't keep up. Research on emotional communication supports this. When emotional intensity exceeds language capacity, miscommunication increases sharply. This is why therapists often recommend slowing conversations during conflict. Speed amplifies misunderstanding. Slowness creates space. I hadn't known that then. I was still trying to perform emotional competence in English. The next morning, something shifted. I didn't rehearse better arguments. I didn't search for stronger words. I chose repair instead of explanation. I said one sentence, yesterday was hard for me. I couldn't say what I felt. That was it. No defense. No justification. Just acknowledgement. That sentence changed the tone immediately. Not because it was perfect, but because it was accurate. Emotional repair doesn't require fluency. It requires responsibility. Studies in relationship psychology show that repair attempts, simple acknowledgements of difficulty, are more predictive of relationship stability than problem-solving language. In other words, saying, "That was hard for me," can be more powerful than explaining why you were right. From that moment, I started approaching emotional conversations differently. When I felt overwhelmed, I named the state instead of the problem. I'm emotional right now. I need a moment. My English is not fast enough for this. These sentences didn't weaken my position. They protected the relationship. I also learned to ask for pauses. Not silence, pauses. Can we slow down? Can I try again? At first, asking felt vulnerable. But vulnerability reduced tension. Science explains why. Pausing lowers physiological arousal, giving the brain time to re-engage language. Centers. Slower speech isn't a weakness. It's a regulation strategy. That first argument taught me something I couldn't learn from books. English during calm moments and English during conflict are two different skills. One is cognitive. The other is emotional. An emotional English grows only through experience, mistakes, and repair. If you've ever argued in English and felt embarrassed afterward, you're not alone. That discomfort is not failure. It's data. It shows you where your emotional and linguistic limits meet. And that meeting point is exactly where growth begins. Arguments don't destroy relationships. Unrepaired misunderstandings do. And repair doesn't need perfect English. It needs honesty, slowness, and the courage to try again. Basically, my first argument in English didn't prove I was bad at English. It proved I was human, learning how to speak when emotions rise. When brain freezes under stress. Have you ever opened your mouth to speak and felt your mind suddenly go blank, like someone pulled the plug on your thoughts? Not because you had nothing to say, but because everything you wanted to say arrived at the same time and crashed. That was my experience after my first emotional argument in English. I wasn't calmer. I was cautious. Every conversation felt like thin ice. And the strangest part was this. I knew more English than before, yet I spoke less. Stress does something unfair to language. It doesn't erase it. It hides it. After that argument, I noticed a pattern. In relaxed moments, my English was fine. In emotional moments, my brain froze. Simple questions felt heavy. Decisions took longer. Even familiar words felt far away. I started wondering if something was wrong with me, or worse, if I was getting worse at English. Neuroscience has an answer that changed how I saw myself. Under stress, the body releases cortisol and adrenaline. These chemicals prepare you to fight or flee, not to explain your feelings in a second language. Blood flow shifts away from the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for planning, reasoning, and language control, and toward survival systems. In normal words, your brain temporarily shuts down the part that helps you speak clearly. This freeze response is automatic. You don't choose it. And it doesn't mean you're weak. It means your nervous system thinks something important is at stake. In emotional conversations, especially in relationships, your brain treats words like tools and hides them to prevent further damage. Ironically, that protection often creates more misunderstanding. I remember standing in the living room one afternoon, asked a simple question, "What do you think?" My mind raced. I had thoughts, feelings, concerns, but no sentence arrived. Silence stretched. The longer it lasted, the worse it felt. Silence turned into pressure. Pressure turned into panic. And panic froze me even more. This is called cognitive shutdown under stress. The more you judge yourself for freezing, the deeper the freeze becomes. It's a loop. Self-criticism adds emotional weight, which increases stress, which further blocks language. That's why telling yourself, "Just speak," never works. It's like telling someone to relax while yelling at them. What helped was understanding that freezing is information, not failure. It tells you your emotional load is too high for your current language capacity. That doesn't mean you should push harder. It means you should slow down. Research on emotional regulation shows that naming the state you're in can interrupt the stress response. So instead of forcing words, I started saying one sentence when I froze, "My brain is overwhelmed." Or, "I need a moment." These weren't excuses. They were signals. Signals to myself and to the other person that something real was happening inside. Something surprising happened when I did this. The pressure dropped. The conversation softened. My brain slowly unlocked. Language didn't rush back, but it returned. Not dramatically. Gently. One sentence at a time. I also changed how I practiced English. Before, I focused on fluency, speed, flow, confidence. After the freeze, I focused on resilience. I practiced speaking slowly on purpose. I rehearsed emotional sentences, not academic ones. I feel stressed. I'm confused. This is too fast for me. These sentences became anchors. When stress rose, I didn't need to search for words. I already had them. Science supports this strategy. When you pre-learn emotional language, your brain can access it more easily under pressure. It's like muscle memory. You don't think, you recall. That recall bypasses some of the stress-related blocks. In simple terms, practicing calm English helps you survive emotional English. Another important shift was breathing. I used to ignore it. Now I noticed it. Stress shortens breath. Short breath signals danger to the brain. Long, slow breathing signals safety. Before responding in emotional moments, I took one slow breath. Not to look calm, but to become calm. That single breath gave my brain enough time to reconnect language and emotion. I also learned to respect pauses. In my culture, pauses can feel uncomfortable. In American conversations, pauses are acceptable, but only if you own them. So instead of freezing silently, I said, "Let me think." That sentence bought me time and reduced misunderstanding. Silence without explanation feels like withdrawal. Silence with context feels like care. Over time, I noticed something else. My fear of freezing made freezing worse. Once I accepted that freezing might happen, and that it was okay, it happened less. Acceptance reduced pressure. Pressure reduction restored language. It wasn't magic. It was nervous system logic. If you're learning English and feel your brain shut down during stress, remember this: your language ability didn't disappear. It went offline temporarily. Treat it gently. Slow down. Name what's happening. Use simple sentences. Breathe. Let your brain feel safe again. Emotional fluency doesn't come from pushing through stress. It comes from learning how to regulate it. And regulation is a skill, one that grows quietly, invisibly, through moments like these. Basically, your brain isn't broken when it freezes. It's protecting you. And once you learn how to work with that protection, instead of fighting it, English slowly finds its way back, calmer, steadier, and more honest than before. Cultural gaps in marriage. Have you ever felt like you and your partner were speaking the same language, yet living in two different worlds? Not because love was missing, but because meaning slipped through invisible cracks. That feeling became very real for me after the argument, when I realized something deeper was happening. It wasn't just English. It was culture. And culture, unlike vocabulary, doesn't announce itself. It quietly shapes expectations, reactions, and what each silence is supposed to mean. Marriage in America carries assumptions I didn't fully understand at first. People value independence, directness, and emotional transparency. You are expected to say what you feel, when you feel it, without too much interpretation. Where I come from, harmony often matters more than clarity. You soften words. You wait. You read the room. Neither approach is wrong. But when they meet inside one relationship, friction is almost guaranteed. I noticed this gap in small moments. When something bothered me, I paused. I thought. I waited for the right time. My partner noticed the pause and felt distance. To them, silence meant avoidance. To me, silence meant respect. The same behavior carried opposite meanings. And because English was still fragile for me, I couldn't explain the intention behind my silence. The result was misunderstanding layered on misunderstanding. Cultural psychology explains this as high context versus low context communication. In low context cultures like the US, meaning is expressed clearly through words. In higher context cultures, Meaning is shared through tone, timing, and shared understanding. When these systems collide, both sides feel unheard. One feels overwhelmed by directness. The other feels confused by restraint. Language alone can't fix this. Awareness can. I remember a moment when my partner said, "Just tell me what you want." That sentence sounded simple, even caring. But it landed heavily. I didn't always know what I wanted in English yet. I felt pressure to decide, to speak clearly, to be emotionally efficient. Inside, I needed time. But time wasn't part of the expectation. This created a new kind of stress. Not emotional conflict, but cultural performance anxiety. I felt like I was constantly being tested on clarity, speed, and emotional confidence. And when I failed, I blamed my English. In reality, I was navigating a different emotional operating system. Research on intercultural relationships shows that conflict often comes not from disagreement, but from mismatched expectations about how conflict should be handled. Some cultures value calm discussion. Others value immediate expression. Without naming these differences, couples often assume bad intentions where none exist. That assumption hurts more than any argument. The breakthrough came when I stopped defending my reactions and started explaining my framework. Not in long speeches. In simple sentences. In my culture, silence means I'm thinking. I need time before I speak. Direct questions feel intense to me. These sentences didn't solve everything. But they changed the tone. They moved the conversation from blame to curiosity. Instead of asking, "Why are you like this?" we started asking, "Where does this come from?" Interestingly, explaining culture required less English than explaining emotion. Culture gave context to my behavior. It reduced the need for justification. Science supports this too. When people understand the reasons behind behavior, emotional responses soften. The brain shifts from threat detection to meaning making. That shift reduces conflict intensity. I also learned to translate emotionally, not just linguistically. When my partner was direct, I reminded myself it wasn't aggression. It was clarity. When I was quiet, I learned to add context. I'm quiet, but I'm here. That single sentence prevented hours of misinterpretation. Another important adjustment was redefining fairness. I used to think fairness meant meeting in the middle. Now I understand it means building a new middle. One that doesn't fully belong to either culture, but respects both. That new space required patience, repetition, and many imperfect conversations. Children, family plans, daily routines, all of these magnified cultural gaps. Decisions that felt obvious to one of us felt confusing to the other. And every decision required language. Simple language. Clear language. But also gentle language. I learned that in intercultural marriage, tone carries as much weight as content. Sometimes more. I started preparing for emotional conversations the same way I prepared for English practice. I slowed down. I chose words intentionally. I anticipated cultural triggers. Not to avoid honesty, but to deliver it with care. This wasn't manipulation. It was translation at a deeper level. Over time, the gaps didn't disappear, but they became familiar. Familiar gaps are easier to step over. They don't surprise you. They don't scare you. They become part of the landscape. And once fear leaves, language flows more easily. If you are learning English inside a relationship shaped by different cultures, remember this: misunderstandings don't mean incompatibility. They mean you are building something new without a manual. Give yourself permission to be slow. To explain background. To ask questions that feel obvious. Love across cultures is not about erasing differences. It's about learning how to live with them honestly. Basically, cultural gaps don't break marriages. Unspoken expectations do. And once you begin speaking not just English, but context, patience and intention, those gaps become bridges instead of walls. Learning English through pain. Have you ever noticed how pain teaches faster than comfort? Not in a cruel way, but in a way that stays with you. After the cultural misunderstandings and emotional arguments, I reached a quiet realization: English was no longer just a subject I was studying. It had become the only tool I had to repair, explain, and reconnect. And suddenly, learning English wasn't optional. It was emotional survival. Pain changes motivation. Before, I wanted English to sound confident. Now, I needed English to be accurate. I needed it to carry apology, vulnerability, and care. And those are heavy things for a second language to hold. When emotions hurt, shortcuts disappear. You can't hide behind grammar drills when someone you love needs clarity. The strange thing is this: pain sharpened my attention. When a misunderstanding hurt, I remembered every word involved. My brain replayed the moment again and again, not to punish me, but to learn. Neuroscience explains this through emotional tagging. When strong emotion is present, the brain marks memories as important. That's why painful moments stick. And that's why language learned in emotional moments stays longer. I stopped avoiding difficult conversations. Not because I felt brave, but because avoiding them hurt more. Instead, I prepared differently. I practiced English the way athletes practice under pressure. Short sentences, clear intention, emotional relevance. I rehearsed phrases like, "I didn't mean that," "I feel hurt," "I'm trying my best," and "Can we start again?" These weren't advanced expressions, but they were powerful. Something unexpected happened. The more I practiced English tied to real pain, the more natural it felt. Textbook examples faded. Real sentences took their place. English stopped being abstract. It became personal. When language carries emotion, it becomes easier to remember because it has a job to do. Psychology calls this experiential learning. We learn faster when knowledge is connected to lived experience. That explains why years of classroom English couldn't prepare me for one emotional argument, but one argument changed how I learned forever. Pain narrowed my focus. It stripped away unnecessary complexity. It forced me to ask, what do I really need to say right now? I also learned to listen differently. Pain makes you sensitive, not just to words, but to tone. I started noticing how emotions hide inside small phrases. A quiet, okay, meant more than a loud explanation. A pause meant uncertainty, not rejection. Listening became less about decoding language, and more about reading emotional signals. And strangely, this made my English better. I responded with more care, fewer words, and clearer intention. There was a moment when I realized I was no longer translating everything in my head. Not because I was fluent, but because I was focused. Pain doesn't allow multitasking. It demands presence. And presence is where real communication lives. Of course, this kind of learning isn't comfortable. Some days, I felt emotionally exhausted. Some days, I wanted to speak my native language and rest. But even those days taught me something important. Rest is part of learning. Emotional overload shuts language down. So I learned to stop before burnout. To step back. To say, I can't talk right now. That sentence alone prevented many future conflicts. Research on stress and learning confirms this. High stress blocks memory formation. Moderate emotional engagement enhances it. The key is balance. Pain that teaches is pain you process, not pain you suppress. I learned to talk about difficulty, instead of carrying it silently. And every time I did, English grew stronger. I also forgave myself for mistakes faster. Pain teaches humility. When you know how much is at stake, ego becomes less important. Being understood matters more than being correct. I stopped apologizing for my accent and started apologizing for misunderstandings. That shift changed everything. People responded to responsibility, not perfection. Over time, something softened inside me. English stopped feeling like an enemy that exposed my weakness. It became a partner in healing. Broken sentences still appeared, but they carried honesty. And honesty travels farther than fluency. If you are learning English and going through emotional pain, relationship struggles, cultural shock, loneliness, know this, you are not learning slower. You are learning deeper. Language learned through pain is layered with meaning. It may not sound smooth, but it is strong. Pain doesn't make English harder. It makes it necessary. and necessity. Rewires the brain in powerful ways. You stop learning to impress. You start learning to connect. That is when language truly becomes yours. Basically, English didn't grow despite the pain. It grew because of it. And once you accept pain as part of the process, not as a failure, you stop fighting the experience and start using it. Slowly. Honestly. One meaningful sentence at a time. Slow English, real healing. There was a moment when I finally understood something important. Speed was never the goal. Healing was. For a long time, I believed that learning English meant speaking faster, thinking faster, responding faster, like everyone around me. But after all the emotional pressure, arguments, and misunderstandings, my mind and heart were tired. That was when slow English entered my life, not as a learning technique, but as a form of recovery. When emotions are heavy, fast language feels violent. Words rush out before feelings are understood. I noticed that every time I tried to speak quickly, my chest tightened, my thoughts blurred, and my meaning collapsed. But when I slowed down, really slowed down, something shifted. My breathing became steady. My mind stayed present. And my English, surprisingly, became clearer. Slow English is not about being lazy or simple-minded. It is about giving your brain enough time to connect thought, emotion, and language. Neuroscience supports this. Under stress, the brain's language centers communicate less efficiently with emotional regulation systems. Slowing down gives the nervous system time to calm itself, allowing words to flow with intention rather than panic. I began practicing English differently. Instead of memorizing long sentences, I focused on short, honest ones. I feel confused. I need time. This is hard for me. These sentences were slow. They were not impressive. But they were real. And real language heals, because it reduces misunderstanding before it grows. Listening slowly mattered just as much. I stopped trying to catch every word. Instead, I listened for meaning, tone, pauses, facial expressions. I learned that understanding is not about speed, it's about accuracy. When I allowed conversations to breathe, I felt less attacked and more connected. Silence stopped being scary. It became space. This change also affected how people spoke to me. When I slowed down, others slowed down too. Communication became cooperative instead of competitive. No one was trying to win the conversation. We were trying to understand each other. That shift alone reduced conflict more than any vocabulary list ever could. Psychologists call this co-regulation. When one person stays calm and grounded, the other often follows. Slow English helped me regulate myself, and in doing so, helped others feel safe speaking with me. Language turned from a battlefield into a bridge. There was also something Deeply healing about repetition. Saying the same simple sentences again and again built emotional security. My brain began associating English with safety instead of threat. This is crucial for adult learners. When language is tied to fear, the brain avoids it. When language is tied to calm repetition, the brain welcomes it. I stopped judging myself for pauses. Pauses are not failures. They are processing moments. In those pauses, my mind checked meaning, emotion, and intention. I learned to say, "Let me think," without shame. That one sentence gave me permission to exist in the conversation as I was, not as I wished to be. Slow reading helped too. I read short texts aloud. I felt the rhythm of English instead of racing through it. I noticed how certain words carried warmth, while others carried distance. Language stopped being mechanical. It became sensory. Sound mattered. Breath mattered. Pace mattered. From a therapeutic perspective, slow language mirrors mindfulness. You stay with the moment instead of escaping it. And when you stay, emotions soften. Healing happens not because problems disappear, but because you can hold them without being overwhelmed. English became part of that holding. I also realized something important. Native speakers slow down all the time. They pause. They restart sentences. They search for words. Fluency is not speed, it's flexibility. Once I internalized that, pressure dissolved. I stopped chasing perfection and started honoring presence. There were still difficult days. Slow English doesn't remove pain, but it gives pain a safe container. Instead of exploding, emotions could be spoken, carefully, honestly, slowly. And spoken pain hurts less than silent pain. Over time, my confidence grew, not because my English became advanced, but because it became reliable. I knew I could express myself, even in emotional moments. That trust in myself was healing in ways I didn't expect. Confidence built on speed is fragile. Confidence built on clarity is stable. If you are learning English and feel stuck, overwhelmed, or emotionally tired, try slowing down. Speak less. Mean more. Let silence help you. Healing does not need fluent grammar. It needs truthful language delivered at a human pace. Slow English gave me permission to be imperfect and still be understood. And in that permission, I found peace. Not dramatic peace, but steady peace. The kind that stays. In the end, I didn't heal first and then learn English slowly. I learned English slowly, and that became the healing itself. One calm sentence. One gentle pause. One honest breath at a time. Love after the storm. There is a strange silence that comes after conflict, not the peaceful kind, but the uncertain kind, where you are not sure whether love is resting or slowly leaving. I remember sitting at the kitchen table in the United States, late evening, the air still heavy after an argument spoken in broken English and tired emotions. The room was quiet, but my mind was loud. This was not just about language anymore. This was about love surviving misunderstanding. When emotions rise, language becomes fragile. Studies in relationship psychology show that during conflict, emotional arousal reduces our ability to process complex language. That means arguments are not a test of vocabulary. They are a test of emotional safety. And when you are speaking in a second language, that safety feels even thinner. One wrong word can sound colder than intended. One pause can be mistaken for indifference. What saved us was not finding better English. It was choosing softer moments. We stopped trying to solve everything during emotional peaks. Instead, we waited. We let the storm pass. Only later, when our nervous systems calmed down, did we return to the conversation, slowly, carefully, with simpler words. I learned to say things like, "I was hurt earlier," instead of defending myself immediately. That sentence is gentle. It does not accuse. It invites listening. Simple English, but emotionally precise. Research calls this emotional labeling, and it has been proven to reduce emotional intensity. Naming feelings calms the brain. In relationships, it also opens doors. Love in a multicultural environment requires translation beyond language. Climate differences taught me patience. Cultural differences taught me humility. Relationship differences taught me empathy. In the US, direct communication is valued, but emotional timing matters just as much. Saying the right thing at the wrong time still hurts. We began creating rituals of reconnect ion. After disagreements, we took short walks. Movement helps regulate emotions. Walking side by side reduces the pressure of eye contact and allows conversation to flow naturally. Many therapists recommend this because physical rhythm supports emotional rhythm. English felt easier when our bodies were calm. I also stopped assuming negative meaning. When English is limited, we often imagine the worst. Silence feels like rejection. Short answers feel like anger. But most of the time, it is just processing. Learning not to fill the gaps. With fear changed everything. Curiosity replaced suspicion. Love after conflict is not dramatic. It is quiet. It shows up in small repairs. A cup of tea. A gentle question. A slower tone. These micromoments rebuild trust. Relationship science calls them repair attempts. They matter more than winning arguments. In fact, couples who repair well argue just as much as others, but they recover faster. English played a role in this recovery. We agreed to keep conflict language simple. No long speeches. No complex explanations. Just clear feelings and clear needs. I need. Reassurance. I need rest. I need a hug. These sentences are basic, but they carry power because they reduce misinterpretation. Over time, something surprising happened. Our emotional connection deepened. Struggle created intimacy. Working through misunderstandings together built a shared language, not just English, but emotional shorthand. A look. A pause. A familiar phrase. Love matured. There is scientific evidence for this. Relationships that survive stress often become stronger, because shared hardship increases bonding hormones like oxytocin. But only if partners feel emotionally safe. Language that is slow, honest, and non-threatening creates that safety. Fast words rarely do. I realized that love does not need perfect grammar. It needs sincerity. It needs patience. It needs room for mistakes. When English failed me, intention carried me. Tone mattered more than structure. Presence mattered more than fluency. For anyone learning English while building a relationship, remember this: conflict does not mean failure. It means growth is happening. Language will break. Emotions will spill. What matters is how gently you pick things up afterward. Love after the storm looks different. It is calmer. Less dramatic. More grounded. You stop proving. You start understanding. And in that space, English becomes a tool, not a weapon. I no longer fear arguments in English. Not because they stopped, but because I learned how to move through them. Slowly. Honestly. Together. Love survived not because we spoke better, but because we listened deeper. And maybe that is the real lesson. Language connects best when it serves love, not ego. When emotions rise, slow English brings them back down, one careful sentence at a time. Building a home in a new language. Home is a strange concept when you move to another country. At first, it feels like a place. Then it feels like a person. Eventually, you realize it is something quieter, a feeling of safety inside yourself. Building that feeling in a new language is one of the hardest emotional tasks I have faced in the United States, especially during the past few weeks when everything still felt unfinished. Imagine trying to assemble furniture without understanding the instructions. You recognize the shapes. You know the goal. But every step feels uncertain. That is what building a life in English feels like. You know what you want to say about family, daily routines, worries and hopes, but the words don't always arrive in the right order. And when words fail, doubt speaks louder. In the beginning, I thought English was only for outside survival, work, paperwork, conversations with strangers. At home, I believed love would translate automatically. I was wrong. Family life runs on communication. Small misunderstandings accumulate quickly when language is limited. A simple sentence like, I'm tired, can sound like emotional distance instead of exhaustion. And that gap matters. What helped was redefining what good English meant inside the family. It was no longer about correctness. It was about clarity and kindness. Linguists talk about communicative competence, the ability to express meaning effectively, even with limited grammar. At home, this mattered more than any test score. We began creating our own rhythm of English. Short sentences, repeated phrases, familiar emotional patterns. Today was heavy. Can we slow down? I need quiet. These phrases became emotional furniture, simple, stable, and reliable. Over time, they made the house feel warmer. Children adapt faster than adults, but they also feel confusion more deeply. I noticed how emotional tone affected them more than words. When I spoke English calmly, they felt safe, even if my grammar was imperfect. Developmental psychology confirms this. Children respond first to emotional regulation, not linguistic accuracy. That realization lifted enormous pressure from me. Daily routines became language practice without effort. Breakfast conversations, bedtime stories, grocery lists. Repetition in safe contexts builds language faster than forced study. The brain learns best when it feels secure. Home, when emotionally stable, becomes the most powerful classroom. Climate and culture also shaped our family dynamic. In the US, seasonal changes influenced mood. Short winter days affected energy. Long drives changed family time. Talking about these changes in English helped us normalize them instead of internalizing stress. Language gave shape to experience. I learned to narrate life slowly. Today was cold. Traffic was long. I felt lonely. These simple narratives helped my family understand my inner world. Narrative psychology shows that humans regulate emotions by telling stories. Even basic stories heal because they organize chaos into meaning. There were moments of frustration. I sometimes felt invisible when I couldn't express complex thoughts. But instead of withdrawing, I learned to signal it. I don't have the words yet. That sentence saved many emotional disconnects. It explained silence without creating distance. Home building also meant accepting accent and imperfection. I stopped apologizing for my English inside the house. Apologies signal insecurity. Confidence, even quiet confidence, builds trust. When I accepted my voice, others listened more attentively. We also established emotional repair rituals. If a misunderstanding happened, we returned to it later. Slowly. Gently. Repetition with correction is how language grows, and how families heal. Avoidance only freezes both. There is research showing that emotional safety increases cognitive flexibility. When people feel safe, they access language more easily. I felt this directly. The more emotionally grounded our home became, the easier English flowed. Not because I studied harder, but because I worried less. Home is where language rests. It doesn't perform. It doesn't impress. It just exists. That realization changed my relationship with English completely. English stopped being something I used to survive. It became something I used to belong. If you are building a family or a home in a new language, remember this: perfection is not required. Presence is. Children remember tone. Partners remember effort. Home remembers intention. I am still learning. I still search for words. But now, when I speak English at home, I am not trying to be fluent. I am trying to be available. And availability, spoken slowly and honestly, is what turns a house into a home. In the end, I didn't build a home after mastering English. I built English inside the home I was slowly creating. One familiar phrase. One shared silence. One imperfect sentence filled with care. When language becomes a quiet victory, there is a kind of victory that does not arrive with applause. It comes quietly, almost invisibly, like realizing one day that you are no longer afraid of something that once controlled you. That was how this journey with English ended for me, not with perfect sentences, not with dramatic confidence, but with calm. A calm that told me I had crossed something important. If you had asked me weeks ago what success in English looked like, I would have said fluency, speed, control, the ability to argue, explain, defend, and persuade without freezing. But standing here now, at the end of this story, I know better. Success was not speaking faster when emotions rose. It was staying present when they did. The final argument we had did not feel like a disaster. That alone felt strange. My heart beat faster, yes. My thoughts moved slowly, yes. But I did not disappear inside myself. I stayed. I breathed. I chose simple words. I feel overwhelmed. I don't want to fight. I need a moment. Those sentences were small, but they carried me across the moment safely. Psychology calls this emotional regulation, the ability to stay connected to yourself under stress. Language plays a direct role in this. When words are accessible, emotions feel less threatening. When words are simple, the brain feels safer. That safety is not academic. It is lived. I noticed something else too. The other person stayed calm as well. Not because I convinced them, but because I did not escalate. Emotions mirror each other. One regulated nervous system can stabilize another. This is not theory. This is human biology. Slow language supports that regulation. Looking back, the biggest mistake I made early on was treating English like a test during emotional moments. Tests trigger fear. Fear shuts down learning. Over time, I learned to treat English like a tool for care. Tools don't judge you. They help you. There is a reason stories are powerful for language learning. Stories give emotions context. They slow time. They allow repetition without boredom. Through this story, about climate, culture, love, conflict, family, and rebuilding, I practiced English the way humans evolved to communicate, through meaning, not drills. I also learned to forgive myself for emotional accents. Sometimes my English sounded flat when I felt deeply. Sometimes it sounded sharp when I felt scared. That was not failure. That was translation in progress. Emotional fluency comes after emotional safety, not before. Research in second language acquisition confirms this. Adults learn best when anxiety is low and motivation is personal. Nothing is more personal than wanting to be understood by someone you love. That desire carried me further than any textbook ever could. The happy ending of this story is not that everything became easy. It is that difficulty stopped feeling dangerous. Arguments became conversations. Silence became thinking time. English became familiar, not intimidating. I now understand that speaking during emotional moments is not about vocabulary size. It is about emotional permission. Permission to pause. Permission to simplify. Permission to be human in a second language. If you are watching this video and feeling discouraged, remember this: you do not need advanced English to live a meaningful life in it. You need usable English. Gentle English. English that shows up when it matters. Learning English through stories works, because stories remind you that language exists to connect, not to impress. Your accent, your pauses, your mistakes, none of them cancel your meaning. They carry it. This story ends well not because there were no conflicts, but because conflict no longer felt like a threat to identity. I can be emotional and still speak. I can be imperfect and still be heard. That realization changed everything. In the end, English did not give me control. It gave me choice. Choice to slow down. Choice to soften. Choice to stay connected when emotions rise. And that is the quiet victory. Not sounding like someone else, but finally sounding like myself, even in another language. This story doesn't end here. Because if you're honest, the hardest part of learning English was never grammar, vocabulary, or pronunciation. It was the moment when emotions rose, when your heart beat faster, your mind went blank, and English suddenly disappeared. If you've ever frozen in an argument, if you've ever wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words, if you've ever felt small, silent, or misunderstood in English, then this channel is for you. Here, we don't chase fast English. We don't memorize empty phrases. We learn real English through real life, through love, conflict, culture shock, family, and the quiet moments no textbook ever teaches. In the next videos, we'll continue this journey. More slow, clear English stories. More real-life conversations when emotions rise. More healing, confidence, and clarity through storytelling. And maybe, just maybe, one day you'll realize something powerful. You didn't just learn English. You found your voice in it. So if this story touched you, even a little, subscribe to the channel. Like the video so YouTube knows this story matters. Comment, what was the hardest moment you ever faced in English? Your story might be the next one we tell. Because English is not about sounding perfect. It's about being understood, even when life gets emotional. See you in the next story. Don't rush. Just stay.